and welcome to the Pickle Jar. My name's Josh, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about batch painting. Pickle Jar! Pickle Jar! Miniatures! Excellent! Hi guys, and welcome back to the Pickle Jar for another beginner's advice video. Now this week, I wanted to tackle something that I think is going to prove very useful for a lot of people in the very near future. 40k 9th edition is now here, and the new codex and the new starter sets and everything are out, and a lot of people are going to be getting into the hobby for the first time, and they're going to be really excited about painting up the miniatures and getting ready to start playing some games with some lovely painted armies. Now, one of the things that I like to do, and many other people also like to do, is to do what we call batch painting. Now, what this means, in a nutshell, is to paint multiple models up at the same time, going through the same process on each model, and it helps you to get more models painted in a shorter amount of time than it would do if you painted them all individually. What I'm going to do in this video is go through some of my top tips on how to batch paint, when to batch paint, and importantly, when not to batch paint. This is by no means the be-all and end-all on advice on batch painting. There are plenty of other people out there, and there are multiple different ways of doing batch painting. So don't take this all as gospel. If you want to know any more, go out there and check out other videos here on YouTube, or speak to other people that you trust that have been doing the hobby for a while. Just one thing before we get started: if you are enjoying the content that we're putting out here on the Pickle Jar, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Right, let's get set up. So the first thing that you're going to need to do when you're planning on doing any sort of batch painting product is to make sure you've got all your tools ready to go before you get started. There's nothing worse than starting painting and realizing, oh, I've not got X, Y, and Z, I need to go and get them. It breaks your flow and it can then slow you down. So make sure you've got everything that you're going to need for that batch painting session to hand already. This includes paints, brushes, any painting handles or grips or anything like that you're going to use. Make sure you've got fresh pot of water, get your wet palette loaded up. Whatever you're going to be using, depending on the project that you're doing, make sure you've got it all to hand and already prepped, ready to go. One thing that I like to do when I am batch painting is to have each of the models that I'm going to be painting on a separate handle. Now, I've seen a few different people do this in different ways. Luke APS glues all his miniatures to a lollipop stick and has them all on one handle, like 5 on one handle. The stuff that I do is a little bit bigger than that, and I just like to have everything on separate handles. They don't have to be these fancy Games Workshop handles. There are plenty of other places available online. And before I started using these, I used to use the lids from spray cans, just with a bit of blue tack and stick your model on top of that. Before that, you can use paint bottles, you can use cork. Like I said, there's other different third-party brands available online. I tend to use the Games Workshop ones because I think that they're really comfy, but it is personal preference. But I would advise using some kind of paint gripper or paint handle so that you're not having to touch the miniature as much. Now, one thing that I would recommend to do before you start batch painting is to have your paint scheme down already. Now, what I mean by this is that you need to have painted one of the miniatures previously. Not the ones that you're going to be painting today, but one of a similar model. For example, if you're painting 5 Space Marines, you should have painted a Space Marine already in the colour scheme that you're planning on doing. That way you can go through, you can decide what order you need to apply the paints in for it to be the fastest and most efficient. You'll know what paints you're going to need, you're going to know how you need to apply them, all that sort of stuff. If you go into batch painting and you've not already got this worked out, then you are going to end up slowing down and stalling while you try and work these things out. So yeah, I would always recommend doing some sort of tester model or just a rough go on something, even if it's on one of the ones that you're going to be painting in your batch painting process. You can always spray over it if you want to start over again to do a more precise version, but you should definitely test out your scheme before you start applying it to multiple models at a time. Now, how I like to do batch painting is to do each step on each of the miniatures in turn, and then by the time I've got to the last miniature and finished doing a step on that one, the paint on the first miniature that I did will be dry and will be ready for me to either do the next step or to apply a second coat or something like that. So in this video, I'm demonstrating my batch painting technique by painting up the Eradicators from the Indomitus box set in my Salamander armor colour. So what I'm doing is I'm applying the contrast paint to the first Marine, and then while that's to one side drying, because contrast paint takes a while to dry in some areas where it's the most recessed, by the time that one is dry, I will have done the other two, and I can then go straight back to the first one and start painting again. This is good, and this is why batch painting works, because normally what you'd have to do is apply the base coat and then wait for it to dry, and that's just dead time that you're wasting. Being able to do multiple in a row and then carry on straight away onto the second layer really helps you speed up painting and makes you get more stuff done quicker. The other thing that you'll notice with batch painting is that the further along you go and the smaller the details are that you're doing, the quicker that you'll get at it. For example, I started off by applying the contrast paint onto these Marines, which is arguably the longest step in this paint scheme. Once that's applied, it's then a quick highlight with moot green and then an even quicker highlight with Urea yellow on the armor, and then that is the majority of the model done. It's all detail bits after that. So each step will not take as long to do, and because there's not as much paint going on, it won't take as long to dry, so you can get that stuff done quicker, and you get round and round, and you do the first model, the second, then the third, the first, the second, the third, over and over again, until eventually you'll suddenly just be at the end of your painting process and you've got 3 models, 5 models, even 10 models depending on the complexity. Speaking of the complexity of your paint scheme, that is something that you're going to need to take into consideration when you're deciding how many models to paint in your batch painting process. For example, I'm painting 3 models here, and that's because the contrast part of my paint process takes a while to apply. I'm quite precise with the contrast paint early on, and then there is a lot of highlighting and lots of little steps going along doing this. So you want to do it so that the first model that you've painted is just about dry when you're finishing the last model that you've painted, because then that's no time wasted. For example, if I was going to be painting something like my Necron Warriors, I would paint them up in batches of 5 to 10 models, because the process that I do is a lot faster, because it's a lot of dry brushing and washers and things like that. It won't take as long to do those. Whereas my Marines, because they take a while to put the contrast paint on, I can't get as many of them done in the same amount of time. So I can only get these 3 done before the one paint on the first one is dry and ready to go back to. Whereas Necrons are a lot faster to do, so you can do more of them in the same amount of time. Does that make sense? Now, I said at the beginning of the video that I would also talk about when batch painting is not appropriate. And that's kind of down to personal preference. I personally don't like to batch paint anything that is unique. And to be fair, it's kind of hard to batch paint stuff that's unique because it's unique. What I like to do, like for example with my Eradicators, I go through, I do all the base coat on the armor, and then I do all the highlights on the armor, and then I do the pouches on all of them, and then I do the black on all of them. Because they're all the same, they've all got the same details on them. If I was to take something like a Captain, that's going to have different detail parts, that are possibly going to need different colours, more metallics, things like that. It'll throw off your routine, and it throws off your sort of rhythm that you get into when you're batch painting. So that would be my advice, is not paint anything batch painting if it's unique, unless you're painting multiples of them, for example. If you've got 3 captains for whatever reason, you want to paint them all up, and you don't mind them all looking the same, then paint them all up together, that's fine. But most people will only have 1 of each sort of HQ unit really, so that's not going to be an issue. Doing this as well means that when you're painting your characters and your HQ units and things like that, you're putting all your attention and effort into that one model to help it stand out, because to be fair, they're your HQ units. They want to stand out, and you want them to be seen on the battlefield because they're usually nicer models than your sort of generic troops and stuff like that, so you're going to want to put a bit more effort into them. So yeah, don't batch paint your HQ. You can, however, batch paint bases. Now, regardless of what you're doing on your bases, whether you're just chucking down some sand and painting it, or whether you're doing something a little bit more stylized like I've done on my Salamanders, You can always batch paint these because I find that getting a few bases done together rather than just one at a time after I've finished each model is a lot more satisfying and it's a lot more time. Now, where you can still do batch painting is when it comes to the bases. I tend to batch paint bases depending on how many models I've got done, and I'll do all of the models I've got done all at the end once all the models are finished. I'll do the bases for all of them together. Now, this is regardless of whether you're doing something that's just sand and PVA and then painting that, or whether you're doing something a little bit more stylized like I'm doing with my salamanders. I tend to wait until I've got a set amount of models, and then I'll blitz all the bases for them all together. It's a lot less time consuming and it's very satisfying when you've gone from having no completed models to suddenly having 4, 5, 6. You get the idea. So to summarise, my tips for batch painting are: have all your stuff ready to go before you get started. That way you avoid having to get up, go and get things, set things up. You've got it all there ready to go and you don't have to break your flow. Have something already done in your scheme that you're wanting to use so that you know how you're going to be painting it, how you're going to be applying the paint, what order you're applying it in, and you don't have to stop and think while you're doing it. You can just go through. You can record this in some sort of paint journal if that's your sort of thing. I tend to just remember what I'm doing with stuff, so I don't tend to do it myself, but I know that some people like to have that sort of thing written down as a reference for when they're doing it in the future. Number 3 is to not batch paint models and to make sure that you've got the right amount of models for any one batch painting project. Don't do too many, don't waste time painting more when the first one is already dry and you could be going back to that. Make sure you know how long it will take you to paint each one and then pick the amount of models appropriate for that. And the final tip is obviously to make sure you batch paint your bases. Not only will this help to tie them all together because they'll all be painted at the same time in the same way, so they'll all look the same, which is what you want your bases to do because it ties your army together, but it saves on resources, it saves on paint. A lot of dry brushing's done, so it wastes paint usually. If you do all your bases together, then you're not wasting as much stuff. So there you go, guys. They were my top tips on how to batch paint and when not to batch paint. I hope you found it useful. If you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. And if you're brand new to the Pickle Jar, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the content we've got coming out in the future. If you want to see more of me, I live stream here on the Pickle Jar every Wednesday evening at 8 PM. And I also host the show with Spud and Nelson over on the Chilling Wargamers channel on Thursdays at 8 PM. If you want to help support the channel, we have our very own merch store where we sell t-shirts, mugs, hoodies, things like that. And if you want to support the channel directly, then there's a link in the description where you can donate straight to the channel. If you want to keep up to date with what we've got going on, then don't forget to check out our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram profiles, the links for all of which are down below in the description. That's all from me, and I'll see you next week with another video.